This is The Sweater with Kathleen Dames. Over our 12-episode season, I will share some of my best sweater knitting techniques with you while we knit a sweater together. Hello, my friends, and welcome back to Season 4, Episode 4 of The Sweater with Kathleen Dames. Today, we are going to talk about enwreathed and about charts, which I know some people, it just makes them very nervous. And so I want to tell you, a chart is just a visual representation of what's going on. And I think they're particularly useful in color work because it's all just a picture anyway, right? In other kinds of charts, lace or cables, they're also visual descriptors of what's going on in the pattern. So it's a matter of sort of learning that language. So luckily, the charts for color work are very simple languages, right? It's either one color or the other, at least with this, because we're just doing two colors. There are, of course, designs in color work that use many more colors, but we just have two to worry about. So on our chart here, we've got the blue and the white. And it's actually the opposite of the way it looks here, because it was just easier for me to do that, which also means it's easier for you to choose the color that you want. So just think of that all the blue squares are the squares for your second color, and then the white is your main color or your background color. And you can see, I'm going to take off the cowl for a moment so as not to distract, because we're going to talk first about, we're doing the pine boughs, the two different kinds of pine boughs, and then the flowering vine here. And then on the cowl, I didn't print that one out, but if you are knitting the cowl, there are two different versions of the flowering vine so that you can swap back and forth. So the thing about a chart is, unlike a reading in a book, you don't start at the top left, you start at the bottom right, and you're going to work your way up. And of course, we're starting with pine boughs. And so with pine bough 1, you knit 1 with your master color, and then you knit 4 with your contrast color, and then you knit 5 with your master color. And then once you get going around, you may realize that it's actually, it's a 10 stitch repeat. And so there will be 4 of the main color and 6 of the contrast color. So don't forget that you have this column here at the beginning. That's what separates the boughs one from the other. But, after that initial setup of the 1 MC 4 CC, you should then think of it as 6 MC 4 CC and go all the way around like that. It just makes it easier. And then you have to remember, when you get to the end of the round, it's time to switch to the next row. And so then you go up to the second row, and we've got 1 MC 2 CC, and then that would be 7 MC, and so it would become 8 MC 2 CC, and on and on. And you just keep following up and over. And of course, our pine bough is going like this, so things change and shift a little as you go along. Round 3 is MC1, CC1, MC1, CC4, MC, and that's going to become 4, because we're going around, we're repeating the chart over and over again. So I hope that makes a little bit of sense. The nice thing about starting with the pine boughs when you're working on that top-down yoke is that it is very geometric and repetitive, and it makes sense because it moves over every round, excuse me. And so that's a little easier. The flowering vine is a more complicated pattern, and so it's good to get used to color work and to reading your chart first with the pine boughs, which are pretty straightforward, before you get into the flowering vine, which is, I think, as I recall, it's 20 stitches, and because it's more organic, it doesn't. It actually does make a lot of internal sense once you get going. You sort of see, oh, now we do a row where there are this many stitches, and then the next one it expands out a little, and then the next one it's a piece and a piece with something in the middle. And so it does have a flow, but it's not quite the same as the geometric progression of the pine boughs. So this is all a long way of saying that you start at the lower right and you work your way across. When you get to the end, at the end of your stitches, you should reach also the end of the chart, because I did all the math so that your yoke should be that number of stitches. And then for the next round, you switch to 2 and you follow round 2, sorry, because we're working in the round, we're not working flat. A few things that may help, using like a sticky note or something, or a ruler. I recommend putting it above the row you're working on, the round you're working on, to block that out, because you haven't done that yet. Some people think like, oh, well, I'll just start at the bottom and I'll cover it up as I go. But it can be a little more confusing to your eye. So it helps to keep that piece of paper or whatever above. So block out everything you need to know except that row. And you could, of course, use 2 pieces and block them out completely so you can only focus on that row. Luckily, these are fairly small charts and it should be pretty manageable. If you are really having trouble following charts as you're knitting, you can do one thing or the other, but it's hard for you to do both, and you are feeling more comfortable with written instructions, you can, of course, write out the chart. And a lot of people do that. There's no shame. Whatever it takes for you to knit and to be happy and comfortable while knitting, then that's what you should do. There's no reason for you to just, suffer through a chart if it just makes you miserable. Okay, so then a lot of people, they'll get like a stack of index cards and they'll write out one round on each card. This is often helpful in bigger projects too. But so you would write out on the card for the first one, you might do like 1 MC, 4 CC, 5 MC to start. And then you may either you may want to do 1 MC and then 4 CC and then 6 MC, because it's the 4 and the 6 that are easier to remember rather than 1, 4, 5. That gets a little more complicated. So you may want to think about that and just make note that you always start with 1 MC and then write out how it flows back around to the first instance of the CC. So some people will write it out on a card, each line. If it's a bigger pattern, down here, it might be easier to do it on each card individually, number the cards. Some people then they'll use a hole punch and they'll put them on a ring, and then they just have it there and they just know where they are. The other component that can help when you are doing color work like this is a row or a round counter. I don't have mine handy at the moment, it's in another project, but the one I have is for circular knitting, so it's on a little loop and it hangs off your needle and it serves as a stitch marker as well. And I just put it at the beginning of the round, and it's got it's a little like a little drum, and it's got 2 wheels on the sides, and you turn them and that shows different numbers in the little window. And so you start at 0, 0. And then each time you go, you turn it 1 as you finish a round. I like to do it that way. Some people like to turn it when they start a round. So if they're going to be working on round 1, they turn the number counter to 1 and then they work around and then they switch to 2. I prefer working on that round, and when I get to the end of the round, to turn it to 1. That's just me. Again, it's a tool. Use it how you want to use it. There is really no reason to do it the way I say if another way makes more sense to you. Okay, because you are the boss of your knitting. I don't know how many, I need to make a pin, because this is just, we are all the bosses of our knitting, and there are lots of different ways to do things in knitting, which is one of the things I love about it. So whatever makes sense for you, whether it's following the chart, writing it out, you could even, if you did the index cards, you could even make a row of the chart with the colors as well. That way that might help you feel more comfortable with charting. But really it's just how you can do it for yourself that makes sense to your brain and translating into your hands and your needles and into your knit. The cowl, so that's where I recommend that you start swatching for your project, because the cowl is big enough. I think I've talked about this before. It's big enough that you can relax and just work around and around. I find small circumferences, I tend to knit, especially color work, tighter. And then that doesn't work out because you are going to be working on a larger circumference when you are knitting your sweater. So I definitely recommend following the charts. You can just use the flowering vine chart here. If you have the sweater, if you have the cowl pattern, you can of course follow both, or you can just do one. It's really up to you how you prefer to do it. One last thing about the pine boughs. If you look at the charts, the second chart, you can be like, what's happening? I don't see the whole pine bough. And the reason that happens is I wanted to shift it and have it go the other direction. And so it's just split, and it really doesn't matter. It's one of the cool things you'll realize is if you do it all the way around, you will end up with the pine boughs all connected the way that the first ones, which look properly connected on the chart. The second time around, you still get the same effect. I'm going to spin Jane around here. So we go to the back, which is where it begins. Sorry. This is the center back, and you cannot tell where I changed rounds. I don't think. I can't. Maybe you can. If you can, let me know. Anyway, that's really everything I think that I can give you for charts right now. There is also something called, it's like sticky tape. It's like sticky notes, but it's in this sort of tape format. Highlighter tape actually is what it's called. And so it's bright highlighter colors, and it's in the strips of tape. And so you can use that instead of sticky notes to cover above and below, or if your brain works this way, you could use it to actually highlight that round or row. And then you'll know that the one that's bright pink is the one you're working on. But the great thing about it is that it has the same low tack stickiness of sticky notes. So it is repositionable. And a lot of yarn stores sell that now. Otherwise, just look for highlighter tape or ask for highlighter tape at your local stationers or whatever. And they should be able to provide you with something that can help. Some people like to put their charts on like a magnetic board, maybe even a cookie sheet. And then they can use magnets in the same way to cover up above and below, so that really you're just focusing on that one round, because sometimes that's what you need. You need that little focus to get you through that round. But you'll discover that with colorwork goes really fast, because once you get in the groove, you just want to finish that round and get on to the next one. So I think you'll find that the cowl will go pretty quickly and the yoke will go pretty quickly. And then you'll have a lot of meditative knitting for the rest of your sweater. So, and I'm going to talk more about that in a few weeks, because I know everybody's still getting started, or maybe you've done your swatch. And remember, we want to block our swatch, by which I mean our cowl, the same way that you're going to block the sweater. It helps to take measurements before you block and after. So before you block, that's information for you for while you're knitting, because you may be knitting along and you measure and you think like, oh, I have so many more rounds to go, or I think I've gone too far. But then if you also have your blocked gauge information, you will know that to get X rows or X inches of finished fabric, you need to do Y rows of knitting, because your gauge might change with blocking. And it's really just best. It's also a good way to check how your yarn is going to react to the way that you are blocking it. So I definitely recommend swatching. We talked about that last time, but when you swatch for this and wreathed, you get a cowl out of it. And so I think that's rather nice. I also like, because this is a more open neckline, I like the cowl sometimes when it's really cold and I want an extra layer. I like the more open neckline for myself. I wear it with a blouse that has a pretty Liberty pattern, and so it's a nice contrast to the color work here, or complement, and I want enough of it to show. So that's why I like a more open collar, but sometimes it is really cold, and so then the cowl comes in handy. You also can just wear the cowl or give it away, or instead of binding it off, you could do some quick decreases and you end up with a hat. So other things you can do with that cowl. But once you have all that information and it's time to get started on knitting, you will need to manage all three of these charts. And luckily for you, we do one at a time, and then usually we have our increase before we start the next one. So it's not too bad, I promise. And then we'll get on to more stuff about splits and stuff next time. I'm going to talk more about color work techniques in episode 6. But I did want to mention that when you are knitting colorwork, and why I have you do the cowl, it's so you have nice loose floats. I've just turned the cowl inside out, and you can see there's still even some stretch here. The more open your floats, you can always tighten up knitting. You can't loosen it up. So that's why I like the bigger project for your swatch. Because it allows you to relax and really not pull tightly on those colors as you're switching between them. So that's what the inside, those are called floats if you haven't done color work before, and the goal is to make them loose. So that is pretty much everything I wanted to say about charts today. I want to remind you that next week is the live episode. I will send out an email letting you know what time. It will be on YouTube. It'll be a live YouTube thing. I may also try and do it live on Instagram. I haven't decided yet. But before that happens, I need you to send me your questions. So hit reply on a newsletter, email, comment on this on YouTube, and ask me questions that you have about sweater knitting, especially about colorwork knitting, because that's what we're working on with this project. And I will answer them live on air. And won't that be exciting? I always find the live show a lot of fun, and I hope you do too. So be sure to ask me your questions. You can also comment on Instagram or wherever else you can find me online, and in my Ravelry group. I haven't talked about that before, but I do have a group on Ravelry, Kathleen Dames Knitwear Design, and you can join that and ask questions there too. So I hope you are having a great time knitting and chart reading. It's all good. Remember that you're the boss of your knitting. Take your time. There's no rush. And of course, these videos, and if you're listening on audio, these things will live on in perpetuity. So there's no rush. If you're not ready to get started, don't panic. Come back later when you're ready. So that's it for today. Remember to ask me your questions for the live show. Rate and review The Sweater with Kathleen Dames on iTunes. That's the place that makes the most difference in terms of ratings. And be sure to follow me on all the social media stuff like we do. So if you have any questions, especially about color work and charts, ask me, and I will answer them next Friday. So thank you so much for being here, and happy knitting. Bye. This is season 4 of The Sweater with Kathleen Dames, and we are knitting the wreathed pullover together. Many thanks to Boughs, Swans Island, and Monostel Uruguay for making such delicious yarns, and to Brooklyn General, Knitty City, and Swans Island Company for selling those yarns to me. Many thanks to my technical editor, my test knitter, and to you for being part of The Sweater with Kathleen Dames. To purchase the wreathed pullover and or cowl pattern, visit kathleensdames.com/thesweater or find it on Ravelry. Remember that you get a copy of the cowl pattern if you purchase the pullover. While you're there, be sure to sign up for my newsletter so you won't miss an episode. Plus, you can always hit reply on a newsletter and ask me any questions that come up about sweater knitting. Posting your progress on social media? Be sure to use the hashtags wreathed pullover and wreathed cowl and tag me at Kathleen Dames. If you have a chance, be sure to rate and review on iTunes, even if you watch the YouTube version of this podcast. Thanks so much for being here, and happy knitting.